Right, so I'm going to bring on a very good friend of the show. This fella, how can I say this? Give him a big, drum roll and whatever, which is appropriate, excuse the pun, the drum roll, because this fella knows everything about music, especially the Merseybeat era. Everything he knows. And this is what we're going to talk about now, is the Beatles, the breakup of the Beatles, and especially the Peter Jackson. He's seen this. He found film after 50 years. It was just locked in the vault, and he found it, and he went, "Wow, I'm going to do something with this." And I think most of us have seen it. Have you seen it?
No. Couldn't get it done, could I? Remember I told you months ago I couldn't get it done.
And it's absolutely stunning because he's remastered it.
What's it called?
Get Back.
Oh, I tried to get it on the other day on the streaming site, and it wouldn't come on.
I've got it on there. Anyway, it's really great. I've got like a certain bit that I put on now and again, which is the rooftop concert, and I just put that on because it was sad in a way. It was very, very sad, but very enlightening as well. Anyway, I'm going to bring on now Mr. Derek Shelmerdine, this man, and there he is. Hello, Derek.
Hi Frank. Hi Gerard.
Hi, Derek. You're all right?
Yeah, very well, thanks, mate.
Good.
So the thing is, Derek, you know everything more or less about, I'm saying everything, music, especially the Merseybeat era. We just grew up, didn't we, around that time. Yeah. I used to go to the Iron Door. In fact, Jason's uncle owned the Iron Door.
Oh, wow.
And I used to go there. I didn't know him, obviously. I didn't know him at all. And I used to go there with my little mates. Used to go down and go to these all-nighters and watch the Searchers and people like that, the Undertakers, the Mozios, Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. So I used to watch them, and they were brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I never used to watch them there. I used to watch the girls and stuff.
Absolutely. Sole purpose of being there, mate.
Is absolutely. So anyway, the Beatles, they Get Back. I don't know whether it's a film or film it's a
documentary. It's just won 5 Emmys in the documentary series. In the documentary part of the Emmy things. Apparently it won all 5 that it was up for. It was eligible for. I mean, it's about 8 hours long. I mean, it's an epic watch. Yeah. But, I mean, it's a fascinating glimpse into really the Beatles' endgame.
Yeah, I like the way you said that because it was an end game, wasn't it? It was an end game, and that was it.
Yeah.
And what was really, I was saying to our kids today, about you coming on the show. I said he's going to talk about the Beatles, and, the breakup and everything else about the Beatles. And I asked Jared, I said, why do you think the Beatles split? And just listen to what Jared says there.
I was always under the impression, my impression was that it was Yoko Ono who split them up because they seemed to drift apart when Yoko Ono appeared on the scene.
And I said, well, yeah, you could say that. When I opened the show and I said that I was having you on, Derek, I said, one of the most important things about the split of the Beatles, I know you're going to tell us everything and your opinion, or what you think split the Beatles. I said about Brian Epstein, when he died, unfortunately, when he took his own life, and I said that to Jared today when we were discussing it. So can you fill us in on, the actual lead up because what I was getting when I was watching Get Back was the amount of people that was coming in. Now, these lads just sat around for years playing their music and writing their music and coming up with words and little whatever it was that they were absolutely amazing. And we found an insight into how they produced the music, if you like.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you see Yoko. And, you know, can you go on from there, Terry, please?
Yeah, I think both the comments about Yoko are interesting. I think the comments about Brian Epstein are as well. And I think that's one of the things that comes across in the Get Back movie. At one point, Paul's asked about, or they're talking about John, and he says that the relationship, the Lennon-McCartney songwriting partnership, was never the same after John got together with Yoko. And it was fascinating. I mean, at different points, all the wives were, well, apart from George Harrison's, but the other couple of wives were there at various times. But Yoko was there for the entire thing, sitting, like almost touching John through the whole thing. And I think the comments about Brian Epstein are spot on as well. In the documentary, the Get Back thing, a couple of times he's mentioned by Paul. And Paul says, you know, and I wrote it down, he quoted, they were talking about the sessions and what was going on. And Paul said that, you know, they weren't really very controlled, those recording sessions. And at one point he says that we need a daddy figure. And at another one, he's talking about the lack of structure for the rehearsals, the recording sessions. And again, quote, he said, we miss Brian Epstein's discipline. And I think one of the things about the Get Back was it's really interesting because it was really part of the process in a way that I don't think the Beatles were ever destined to be another Rolling Stones. In terms of going on and on and on, I think that the Beatles were always going to have a very finite lifespan. You know, for instance, I mean, they all variously wandered off at times. I mean, Ringo had walked out during the White Album. You know, you have Pepper in '67, then the White Album followed that. And around that sort of time as well, you've got Paul McCartney and George Martin working on the soundtrack for The Family Way, the movie. I think that was really the first solo project that took off. And during the White Album recordings, Ringo walked out on the band as well. He was away for about 2 weeks. Apparently, he spent the time on Peter Sellers' yacht, and I think I can't remember offhand, but I think it was back in the USSR. That was at the time he walked out, so I don't think he features on that at all. So, and if you look at the Get Back itself, I mean, George Harrison walked out. I mean, as early as sort of day 3, George said to Paul, "I always feel I'm annoying you." And
that's right. Can I come in there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I noticed that myself.
Yeah.
And I think it was pent-up anger or frustration, whatever way you could look at the way George said. And he did say, he said, I think I'm annoying you. Because Paul was saying to him, was it as he was like playing the guitar, he said, no, I want you to go, blah, blah, blah. And he couldn't get it quite right.
Yeah, Paul was forever telling George how to play the guitar.
Exactly.
Enough, when they had that so-called private in the documentary again, that private conversation, John and Paul, that was actually somebody had hidden a microphone on the table. They had that conversation. They both agreed that John and Paul, that they both told George how to play his guitar. And John turned to Paul and said, yeah, you do that to me as well.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, Paul was very much in control, very much to the fore, almost like the sort of musical director.
Well, can I come in there again? Yeah. Because I think that's fascinating what you've just said there. especially about control, especially like when George Harrison says, "I annoy you," and what I said, because he was trying to play with what Paul wanted, and it wasn't right. And also what you've just said about John Lennon, you were telling me how to play as well. Yeah. Do you think without his input, it could have been a lot different? Paul McCartney's input, about the music, I mean.
Well, without Paul's input?
Yeah, no, I mean, with his input of taking control, as you said,
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting. Paul really started to drive the Beatles around the time of Sgt. Pepper. Pepper was all Paul's idea. He had the idea of being sort of incognito, hence the Lonely Hearts Club Band, because groups at that time, 67, all had long names like Big Brother and the Holding Company. He was very much the instigator of Magical Mystery Tour as well. He based it on Ken Kesey, the beat poet, beat writer, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest guy. He, a year or so earlier, had got this psychedelically painted bus they called Further. And they drove it in a sort of journey across America. And that was very much what inspired Paul for the Magical Mystery Tour. And you could see it. One of the things I found really interesting about the documentary was you could see that Paul was telling everybody what to do all the time in the first half of it. And then about day 7, I think, George walked out. And I always remember the way he left. I thought it was really interesting. That Paul had been telling him how to play Get Back constantly. So he comes to the lunch break and they're walking out. And George says, "I think I'll be leaving the band now. See you around the clubs." And his diary entry for that day was fascinating. It was on the show. It said, "Got up, went to Twickenham, rehearsed until lunchtime, left the Beatles, went home." And that really summed it up.
He came back to Liverpool.
That's right. That's right. I mean, John Lennon said that, if he doesn't come back by Tuesday, we'll get Clapton in. Yeah. It was a serious leaving, I think, on George's part. I think he could very easily have not come back.
Yeah. Well, just before that, you said about the wives going in.
Yeah.
And I froze when I was watching. I froze the film. And here you see, she appears for a few seconds. That's all. No more than 10 seconds. And George is just sitting down against the wall. And it was Pattie Boyd, and she came over to him, she kissed him, and she walked out, kissed him on the cheek and walked out.
Oh, right. Oh, I missed that little bit, yeah.
Yeah, well, what did I say to you about who I think one of the instigators of breaking the Beatles up? Who did I say to you in the car?
George Harrison.
I said George Harrison.
Yeah, well, George was very frustrated at a number of levels. I mean, in any other band, he'd have been the main songwriter. He's a really talented songwriter. But another frustration of his was that a lot of the songs he brought to the table never got recorded. I remember in the Get Back documentary, he comes in, I forget which day it was, he comes in and said, "Oh, I wrote I, Me, Mine last night." And, it just got ignored. And that didn't find its way onto a Beatles album. I mean, it came out on probably his first solo album, because that was one of his best songs, really.
Well, do you know that was just something, and they're sitting around, and I think it was something, and he wanted a word. George Harrison, this is. He wanted a word, and John Lennon said, "Oh, what did he say? Something like the cauliflower or something mad like that." What was the song? I forget the song. A very big song. Something in the way she moves. I'm sure it was.
Right.
Like no other. That's what he put in himself, George Harrison. And he said, "Well, something in the way like that." And that was one of the things. And that must have frustrated him. He said, "Just think of a word.
Yeah.
You need to ask us."
Yeah.
So, I think it was more frustration with George because, as you said, he was a very, very talented fella. Yeah. And don't forget, is it something that's been the most
I think after Yesterday, it's the most covered song of all time.
Yeah.
I think unless it might have changed, but I'm pretty sure Yesterday was the most covered, and Something was the second most covered song, like in the history of the world. But what was interesting is if you looked at George's attitude by the time you get halfway through the second period, I mean, he was telling Paul what to do. The fact, I think, that they really took him seriously. And what was interesting, when they came back, there was that jam with Yoko and the three of them, and you could see that I think they spent one day in the studio when George wasn't there, and they missed him, really missed him. And I think that was when they realized just how important a figure George was. I think the key thing about the Beatles is, and you can't say it about many bands, is that the whole was far greater than the sum of the parts. You can see that from the solo careers. I mean, the songwriting of Lennon McCartney, I mean, it's just that there's nobody quite like them. And I think that what happened was that they after George walked out, and they met a couple of times, second time George agreed to come back. And one of the real bones of contention, of course, was the idea of a live concert. I mean, they were going to have it in the theatre at Sabratha in Libya. I mean, a fabulous backdrop to a concert like that. But George really wasn't very keen. And it was interesting that when sort of George negotiated why he'd come back, or how he'd come back, they dropped the idea of the TV special, and they dropped that idea of a full-blown live concert. They always wanted to have something live. They all wanted, well, more or less. George wasn't even that keen to go onto the rooftop concert. But I think that was a very important part of it. And I thought that was interesting as well. When the police guy came into the foyer and asked about the second song, because they'd had 30 complaints, I seem to remember, at the police station about the noise. Yeah. And he politely asked the young lady in the reception area, could you please turn the music down? Or what did he say? Yeah. Can you turn it down, please? And I thought that was great. It took them about 4 songs before the 2 constables managed to get up to the roof, and then the sergeant joined them. And then there was lots of threats of arrests and all the rest.
Well, that was that Crossbow, wasn't it? You know, that was one of the stupid policemen. But you're seeing a totally different outlook from the sergeant, because he was very polite. Yeah. He said, "What do you?" And he said, "Well, they're on the roof." He said, "Can I go up there?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, do you mind?" And he was very polite.
Oh, absolutely.
He came up, and you see him looking out like that, the doorway. Yeah. Because the girl said to him, "Don't go on the thing; it might just collapse." The roof itself, because there's that many people up there. And he didn't. So you see him standing there. Yeah. Because I'm a good observer, and as you see him standing there, all of a sudden, then they're playing, and they've gone. Then the policemen. Yeah. They've gone, those 2 stupid policemen, who threatens with arrest and everything else. Right. And anyway, they left, and then they just carried on. But they must have been saying, well, this is going to be the last song or whatever. Yeah,
I mean, I seem to recall John was actually talking to, I think it was the sergeant towards the end. And, they at one point, actually, before the last 2 songs, John actually turned to somebody and said that my hands are really cold. I'm having difficulty playing the chords.
Yeah, that was John. Yeah, that was John. Yeah, you're saying going he said I'm cold, because don't forget this is the 31st of January.
That's right. Yeah, it was.
You're on a roof.
It must have been chilly.
Oh, it must have been freezing. Absolutely. Yeah. But I'll tell you, the place where they wanted to, not they wanted to go, where the production company wanted them to go. And it was a place where I would have loved to have visited, to be honest. Yeah. And it was Palmyra in Syria. And Palmyra, it would have been great if they would have gone there. And I'll tell you for why. Because through all the ISIS stuff that went on a few years ago, they actually blew up Palmyra. It was one of the most iconic historical Roman sites around the Middle East, Palmyra. Yeah. And that's where, the production team said, we'll go there.
Yeah.
And that would have been great. Just imagine you've got a big thing of the Beatles playing in this like amphitheatre with a wonderful backdrop.
Yeah.
It's there no longer.
Yeah. It would have been good, I think, if they'd done a full-blown live concert. I think one of the problems is that they hadn't done concerts for years, since before Pepper. They stopped touring at the time of Revolver. I don't think they ever played Revolver on stage. I think the other big factor as well in the split, and that really wasn't all that noticeable in the film, because it sort of came towards the end, was the whole Alan Klein thing. And I think you're absolutely right about Brian Epstein. I think, you could say he was the fifth Beatle. He was a very important factor, I think, in their success. Apparently, he wasn't a great businessman. He didn't negotiate all that tremendous deals with record companies and the like, so their margins were never very good. Which Alan Klein was an absolute master, a bit like Colonel Tom Parker with Elvis Presley. They were master negotiators. But Alan Klein had, John had met Alan Klein, of course, when he did that Rolling Stones TV special that never happened, the Rock and Roll Circus, because Klein was managing the Rolling Stones. He'd taken over the Rolling Stones from Andrew Loog Oldham. So John knew him, and then John invited him to come and talk to them, and he was very impressed by Alan Klein. Of course, Paul McCartney wanted his Linda's brother and father-in-law, the Eastmans, Lee and John Eastman. And for a very short period, they were both signed up. They were both involved in the management of slightly different elements of the management, but that didn't work out, as you can imagine.
Well, going back to Klein and the Rolling Stones, because they did something, whatever it was, whether it was a video or whether it was a concert or whether it was what, I don't know. And Lennon turned around and he said to McCartney, he said, they made more money than we've made with this man.
Oh, Alan Klein was a famed negotiator. He worked with other people as well. And I mean, he would go to a record company and he would get a really good deal. Just like Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, was cut from the same cloth, basically. I mean, people go on about him, 50%, and that's bad and all the rest of it. But what you don't look at is the fact that he negotiated absolutely unheard of fees for Elvis. In terms of how much he was paid for his gigs at Vegas and the record company, RCA. Because what he'd do, Colonel Parker, he used to keep going back to RCA, going back to the movie companies and renegotiating the deal up and up and up. And I think, the Beatles really, I mean, they managed themselves after Brian Epstein. That's when they set up Apple Corps. And they were rudderless, basically. I mean, they weren't touring. They didn't really need a manager in a way. I mean, they had a long-term contract with Parlophone and Capitol Records. So that, in a way, sort of took care of itself. There were no tours to negotiate. So, in a way, they didn't really need one. But I think that was so evident when they went into the Twickenham studios to start recording. The Get Back became Let It Be. I mean, they just messed around most of the time, jamming on old rock and roll stuff, jamming on some of their earlier songs. They were writing the songs as they were going along.
Did you think that it was too? I'm sure one of them said that the studios were too big, because they were in this huge place where they did epic films,
Yeah, but it's a movie studio. I mean, that's where they filmed things like James Bond. I mean, they took that because a guy called Dennis O'Dell was part of the Apple. He was responsible for Apple movies. And he was, I think he was producing The Magic Christian with Peter Sellers and Ringo Starr.
Well, that's when Ringo Starr got off, didn't he? When you said he was always on Peter Sellers' yacht.
That's right. They must have been friends before that. Absolutely. So, I mean, there are so many instances of Beatles sort of doing their own thing as they're going along. Oh, back to sort of 65, 66. So I think it was always inevitable that they were going to go their own ways. And in fact, the day after the last day of recording, George turned to them and said, "I'm planning to do my own solo album. You know, I suggest you do some solo projects as well." And this, of course, is a long time before the Beatles actually split up, because it's January 68, 69 rather, and the bickering. What happened was that the guy that was producing the album, Glyn Johns, he actually produced 2 different finished versions of the original Get Back album, but because the Beatles, but they were bickering so much themselves, they could never agree on a version. And what happened was that Abbey Road sort of came along in the middle of that while they were still arguing the toss about the Get Back tapes, and Abbey Road went out. And then John Lennon worked with Phil Spector on his 3rd single, Instant Karma. And he really rated Spector. And shortly after he finished Karma, he invited Phil Spector in to look at the tapes. And one of the things I loved about the movie was that they said that, they were inspired to do this Get Back as a live thing. And they also deliberately did not want to use studio chicanery and overdubs. So the whole thing was intended to essentially be a live in the studio album. And then if they don't bring in the one guy who is famed for overdubs and strings and just about anything you can name, Phil Spector with his wall of sound, they brought him in, and he then turned the Get Back tapes into the Let It Be album. Paul McCartney hated it. Because he brought his own Let It Be Naked out, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe.
The thing about Phil Spector, after the Beatles broke up, he did John Lennon, that is, he did an album with him, didn't he? And especially Stand By Me.
That's right,
Stand By Me.
Brilliant.
I've actually met Benny King, you know.
Oh, wow.
Me and my daughter, Francine.
Wow.
I was talking about the cover version of Stand By Me by John Lennon.
Yeah.
And he said, it's very powerful.
Yeah.
It's a very powerful thing. And that's the way, to me, I never said to Benny King, but to me, Lennon's version of Stand By Me is so powerful, because I was told that Spector said to him, put your feelings, he said, into the Beatles. Now, John Lennon missed the Beatles, no matter what. It's just like, when you said about when George, said, I've had enough, I'm going. Don't forget, they were mates. Yeah. These are kids. These are like 14 or 15-year-old kids, mates. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, they got to the age of, 30 or something like that.
Yeah.
And, they've been working so hard together through. Yeah. And then bang, George just gets up and walks out, goes back to Liverpool or something like that. Whatever.
Yeah, he went back to Liverpool. The other thing I thought was really fascinating was that I can't remember where he features, sometime towards the end of it, is Ivan Vaughan was there, who was the friend that Paul McCartney was, John Lennon's friend, who introduced Paul McCartney to John Lennon when he famously played the Wootton Church Festival, Church Fete. And was actually, he must have worked for Apple, the Apple organization, had a boutique. The guy that designed the studio, when they moved to from Twickenham, as you said, it was too big and cold. So they decided to custom build a recording studio in the basement of their Apple headquarters in Savile Row in West One. And the guy that they brought in to do it was a guy called Alexis Magic Alex Mardas. And he was actually a part of the Apple Corporation. They'd set up Apple Electronics for him. Apparently he had all these madcap schemes. And by today's standards, I was reading that he cost the Beatles about £5 million in projects that never really went anywhere. But what was interesting was nobody liked the studio. You know, he created the studio downstairs, and when they all got there, they thought there was far too much hiss and general noise. So Glyn Johns contacted George Martin at EMI, and George Martin sent some 4-track recorders over for them to use. But it's interesting, really, just how many sort of tentacles the Beatles had going into all sorts of areas. I mean, that's one of their problems. Why, when Alan Klein came on board, I mean, they were losing money hand over fist. And one of the first things he did, he closed down the Apple Electronics, for instance, and I think he closed down the Apple Boutique shortly after as well, because that wasn't making any. They tended to give the clothes away.
Yeah, because they were paying wages out, and it was doing nothing, the boutique.
Yeah.
It was up doing that, and because they felt sorry, Jared, you know, for the workers, and they didn't want to put them out, you know, out of work.
Yeah.
And they just kept it going, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You know, it's very much part of, you know, you got to remember this is the late 60s. This is the whole hippie, you know, money is a dirty word kind of concept. I mean, very, very different to the sort of rock and roll world of today, where, you know, a couple of hit records and people seem to be millionaires. In those days, well, an awful lot of people got ripped off by their managers. I remember seeing an interview with Noel Redding shortly before he died, bass guitarist with Jimi Hendrix. And he was saying he was still fighting the record company and or old management to get some of the royalties from his Jimi Hendrix Experience days. So, you know, it was a very different time, I think.
But, you know, when you're looking at that and you're seeing documentaries about the Beatles, I don't think there's anything better than Get Back, because you actually see them rather than you and I talking about them. Yeah. You see them talking, you see them playing, you see them trying to make up songs. To make up, it was 14 songs within 2 weeks.
Yeah, I know, it's an incredible task.
Absolutely amazing. And you see Paul, you haven't seen it, have you?
No.
You see Paul, and he's just strumming away, isn't he? And it's a Get Back he's trying to play. Yeah, it is a Get Back, and he's just strumming his, you know, bass guitar. Yeah. And he's putting words to it, and, you know, like umming along and putting words, and that's how Get Back came about. It's incredible.
He's a magician, Money. The man was a magician.
Yeah,
he's a great wordsmith, yeah. But they just bounced off each other, Lennon and McCartney, as songwriters. You know, they together, they just produced such amazing work. Get Back's interesting, though. I mean, it started out very much on the whole immigration thing, didn't it? Because that was the time when Powell's Rivers of Blood speech.
I never ever knew that. That's where the title come from? Yeah. I never ever knew that.
Oh, the first lyrics were very much referring to people from other parts of the world. And then the lyrics got modified. I mean, it's not difficult to find up on the internet an original version with those original lyrics. And they're a far cry from the version that was actually released. But what was interesting as well is in the documentary, what they say, one of the subtitles, so there are a lot of subtitles going on, and when they were playing Get Back with the original sort of immigration lyrics, there's a subtitle that says, quotes, Beatles turn Get Back into a protest song condemning white nationalism. Which I thought was really quite interesting.
Well, one of the most important things about, you know, the lyrics of, you know, the songs, and it was about life as itself.
Yeah.
I always remember Frank Sinatra. He went to see Sammy Davis Jr. He was in New York, and he never went to see him. He just went into this club, and Sammy Davis Jr. was, you know, in a little, I don't know whether it was a trio or whatever.
Yeah.
And he said, "Wow, this fella's brilliant." He went back again or something like that to somewhere, and because he was black, they wouldn't allow him in.
Yeah.
And Sinatra, you know, went, whoa, you know, that was it then. That was, and this is where Sinatra came out as a great man about racial equality.
Yeah.
And John Lennon was the same, and the whole of the Beatles were the same, because when they were in America, you know, this theatre was sold out, and they wouldn't play just to a white audience. They said no, because they didn't want blacks in the audience. They said no.
Yeah.
No, we're not like that. We are not like that. We want an integrated audience.
Yeah, they said we won't play then.
So, you know, this is what you've got. You've got this fantastic. You've only got to listen to the ballads of John and Yoko.
Yeah.
And, you know, what the press thought of him.
Yeah.
What the press thought of John and Yoko.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. We look like a guru and like tramps or something like that, the line goes. Look like gurus in drag. Because of his Indian connection. And it was shocking the way the press undermined John Lennon and Yoko Ono. Whether it was because of their ethnicity, I just don't know.
Maybe the press blamed Yoko Ono for the breakup of the Beatles.
Maybe.
I think there was a lot of that at the time, I think more so then than now, in fact. A lot of people thought that she was very much part of it, but I think she was only just a small part of it, really. I mean, there were several comments in the film how things between John and Paul really weren't very, very strong by the time they were doing those recording sessions.
But as I said, Derek, you know, you've got the likes of, how can I say this? You've got the likes of John Lennon, right, in the studio. Now, don't forget, these lads have been together for years.
Yeah.
And, you know, even in Paul McCartney's parlour, even in Mimi's parlour, you know, playing together, then going into studios and playing together and letting no one in. And all of a sudden, when Lennon, you know, and Yoko gets together, she's there.
Yeah.
She's next to it. She's in the group. She's sitting there. Yeah. And I think it made, you know, the other fellas uncomfortable. And I've seen that in the film. Not only that, you know when I said about George Harrison, and you see Patty Boyd, just for less than 10 seconds, you see it. And she must have thought to herself, I'm not coming here again, because he invited her down, right? Yeah. Then you had Linda McCartney going in.
Yeah.
Then you had Ringo's wife, Maureen Copper.
Maureen was there, yeah.
And then George Harrison, you know, when he came back to the Beatles, did you notice who he had in the studio?
No, I didn't actually.
The Harry Krishna fella.
Oh, the flowers. Oh,
that
was, I thought, the funniest thing. The Harry Krishna guy was sitting there on the floor at the beginning. I thought one of the funniest moments was that George walked out. He left the band, and the other three went into the studio the following day to do some recording, and a bunch of flowers arrived, delivered. And the guy who delivering said, "Is a Mr. George Harrison about?" And what had happened is his Hare Krishna mates had sent George a bunch of flowers to the studio in total blissful ignorance of the fact that he'd left the band the day before. And I thought that was such a poignant moment in a way. Yeah. Really did.
Hey, Eric, you know, like when you're coming on the show again, because we've got a split now, in a couple of minutes' time.
Can I just ask Eric one question?
I've got to ask, go on.
Okay, just one question, Eric. In your opinion, then, what caused the breakup?
I think it was always going to happen, to be honest. I think the Beatles had run its course by that particular time. If you imagine that this was not their last album, Let It Be, Get Back was so delayed that Abbey Road, which was really their last album, got released. I think the Beatles had really just run its course. I think the Yoko thing was part of it. I think George wanted to do his own thing. He said that on the penultimate day. I want to do a solo album. John and Paul were already in the sort of solo album area. Because it was when the Daily Mirror had the headline, Paul is quitting the Beatles, it was because a press release that was intended to go with Paul McCartney's first solo album, McCartney, accidentally found its way to the Daily Mirror, and they read between the lines. So, you know, I mean, the writing was really on the wall, I think, from Sgt. Pepper, really. I mean, Ringo walked out during the White Album. So I don't think it was any one particular thing. I think they really missed Brian Epstein and his guidance. And
it's discipline, isn't it? It's like you said before, discipline. And he did keep them in line. He really did. Okay, so if John wouldn't have been cruelly killed, murdered, assassinated, whatever way you want to call it, do you think that he would have ever got back? Because on the Andy Peebles tapes, he turned around, didn't he, and said, I want to hire the QE2 or something like that, sail across and give a concert, a live concert, me and the lads, in Liverpool.
I think there's a strong probability they would. They did actually play a session together. John and Paul did a recording session in New York, I think it was. It got released as a bootleg called Toot and the Snort in 74. Toot and the Snore in 74. So, you know, they were actually back playing together again. I think there's particularly in this day and age of reunions, I think there's quite a reasonable chance that they'd have actually got back together. Even if maybe it's something like a Live Aid, because Pink Floyd had been split up for ages. They split up in an extremely acrimonious way as well. And they got back for, you know, a big charity event. And it wouldn't surprise me if, you know, if all four Beatles had been around in the 90s or 80s or later. I think they probably would have got back together for maybe a one-off.
I reckon so as well. I think he would have done a well. So can you just
imagine that, Bill? If Beatles, Brothers of Man, Mud, would have been great, wouldn't it? All appearing at Butlins.
ABBA.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a few comments here. When George brought out the hit, Got My Mind Set on You in '88, everyone still says it's one of the Beatles, more so than George Harrison. I think they were saying it was a Beatles song rather than a George Harrison song.
Yeah.
And Andy Gamble says, listening in, great show as always. Mark Kinney says, Derek, when John and Paul harmonised, I didn't realise John could actually go very high with his voice when he wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great harmony.
Sorry, Derek. Charlie Kane says, one of the few people to beat the record company was Tom Petty.
Yeah.
And did you know Lennon's mother's house got sold today?
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah, they used to practice in the back room.
Yeah,
when and it went up for auction, and some fella bought it for his daughter, 280,000. It was an end terraced house kind of thing. It's on the news tonight here, the local news.
Oh, brilliant!
Yeah, he's Al Beatles fan. He bought it for his daughter, 280 grand.
Well, this Brian Everly says, Frank, you have just said probably why they broke up. It was just a simple thing, life. They have been together from 12, 13-year-olds. Different, it's no different to any workers really. It becomes stale. But these boys were different gravy in every way. Never see the likes of them again.
No. There's only two people in that league, Elvis and the Beatles. There's nobody else in the league with them. I mean, they are true, legend beyond fame.
Well, do you know what? They always try to compare, didn't they? Never forget this. I'm not talking about the Stones. Dave Clark 5.
Yeah.
I always remember that.
With the
Beatles. And it was London trying to promote, because the Stones couldn't do it, and they knew that. Then all of a sudden, this new band came up,
Yeah.
Dave Clark 5, and they tried to say, "Oh, these are better than the Beatles." And
Freddie and the Dreamers.
Gladwell, I didn't like that. How you know what? He used to get on my nerves then. He was awful, that Freddie Garrity.
He's an entertainer.
Oh, shocking. Derek, you listen, do you know when you come on again, and you talk about the Merseybeat era, you know, the likes of the Irons or the likes of the bands that appeared there, and also bands that came from all over the country, including Dave Clark 5.
That's right.
What about
the Cavern? Could you do that for us next time?
Yeah, sure.
Brilliant.
What about Derek talking about his own music career? What are you laughing at?
I'm just saying, you know, you don't think of these things, because I want him on again. I want him to talk about, you know, the Iron Door. I want him to talk about the Cavern. But we know about the Cavern. But I'd like you to tell us, like, who actually went there. Because the only time that I ever went there, I went there once, and just before it was knocked down. And I was having a cup of coffee there. But at least I went in. Because the other time we went down, I went down, you know, Mugger, Benny Ambrose and a few of them, Tony Farrell, Joey Farrell. And we were down, you know, going down the stairs, and we were all dressed up in crumbies. And everyone else was like beatniks, you know, and that's all. So anyway, the Dave Clark 5 was on, and we were standing in the queue on the stairs, and all of a sudden this drum came bouncing down, and it hit Benny, you know, on the head. And Benny turns around, so it was Dave Clark, and he started fighting with him, but we didn't know at the time. Anyway, we never got in, we got through out, and that was the only time. But, you know, I'm not saying incidents like that, I'm talking about, you know, wonderful bands that actually went on, and you wouldn't think. Did I tell you I was buying, genuine this, I was buying some, you know, bin bags outside Owen Owens, you know, in Williamson Square. I'm walking down, talking to this lad named Blackie, because I knew Blackie, you know, and he used to buy me bin bags off him going home.
I remember him,
I remember Blackie.
Yeah.
So, and who was walking down was this big tall fella dressed in black. And it was Johnny Cash.
Oh, wow.
Johnny Cash. And he asked me and Blackie where the Cavern was. He asked me, and I said, it's down there. But he was dead tall.
Yeah.
I didn't realise how tall Johnny
I
Cash.
didn't think he was big. I thought he was about 5'7", 5'8".
No, he was 6'4".
Was he?
Yeah, and he had this big hat on as well, you know, a cowboy hat.
Thank God. Go incognito. Johnny, if you go over a walk around in Liverpool, go incognito.
Exactly.
Put that hat on.
But he only wanted to see where the Cavern was.
Yeah.
And Blackie couldn't move because he was selling his bin bag.
Yeah.
So I said, yeah, I'll show you. I never went to the Cavern. I never went down to Matthew Street. I showed him, you know, in Whitechapel. I just said, just go over there, Johnny. He said, just go over there.
Yeah.
You know, because I had to get home with the bin bags. Unbelievable, actually.
That's a great story.
The bin bag overloads in the house. He had to get home or he got murdered.
Exactly, or bin bags. There would have been bin bags at the time.
I met my wife.
Maybe sort of
Stay in the bin bag.
I'm in the bin bag now.
Yeah, buying bin bags off Blackie. Derek, it's been absolutely wonderful. So will you do that for us?
Yeah, sure.
You know, just have a look at you know, some of the like groups. I know that there was fantastic bands that actually played at the Cavern, and also and talk about the likes of Rory Stone, the likes of the Searchers, the likes of the Undertakers. They were great.
The big three as well were always one of my favourite live bands.
Yeah, absolutely. You know,
were awesome.
They were the bands. They were the bands that you know, as youngsters we wanted to go and see.
Yeah.
So will you talk about that the next time?
Yeah, sure. That'd be great. Look at some of the, you know, Liverpool bands that didn't necessarily find massive success elsewhere. There's so many, so many great bands at that time.
Oh,
you must probably know more than us about them, Zarek.
Yeah.
There's a few comments here. Brian Edley says, "Thank you, Derek. Fabulous, mate. Take care."
Oh, thank you.
Andy Gamble says, "Derek has been superb."
Rory Stone was good too, says Mark Innes. Well, do you know where Andy Gamble, who says Derek has been superb.
Yeah.
He's in a band called Searching. And I've seen this band, Searching. And obviously it's a tribute band to the Searchers.
Yeah, brilliant.
And I'll tell you what, they're brilliant.
Yeah.
They dress in there, the black and white, the Searchers used to dress in.
Yeah.
And absolutely brilliant. Searching, Andy Gamble's Searching.
Brilliant.
And he's been listening in. So listen, wherever, when have we got it on? Will you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, look at some of the bands. Yeah. Brilliant.
And talk about that. So listen, Derek, just before you go, sorry about this. Can you talk about your book that you've got out?
Yeah.
Unravelled. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is it. Rock'n'Roll Unravelled.
Mate, that's a big one.
Yeah, show it again. Can you show it again? That's it. Rock'n'Roll Unravelled.
Yeah, it tells a story. I mean, what it is, it's in three parts. The middle of it is it happened on this day, so it's not start the beginning, read to the end. It's dip in and dip out. And what it is it's the story of rock and roll from its roots, blues, Robert Johnson and the like, through to mid-70s punk. I had to stop somewhere, so I thought, well, I'll choose the British punk era, 77, 78, or 76, 77. Because that's when the music turned full circle, and it went back to its roots, if you like, of being bands who weren't virtuoso musicians playing 2-minute songs in small venues. Because rock and roll got a little bit out of control in some ways, with stadiums and 20-minute guitar solos. And it also looks at the influencing things, socially influencing things like the Vietnam War. So it's quite a bit about I wouldn't say the highlights of the war, but if you like, the landmarks of the Vietnam War. And the first part's a timeline. And so it's all of those thousands of stories put chronologically. And you can see genres ebbing and flowing. You can sort of read between rock and roll's lines, as it were. And you can ask the question, well, what else was going on in the world of music and other things when the Beatles released their first single, Love Me Do? And you find we were not far from where we are now, on the verge of World War III.
That'll be absolutely brilliant.
Do you ever watch the Top of the Pops now? They show old Top of the Pops on. Like in the 80s, and I'm watching them 80s, and I'm going, I don't know them. I've never even heard of these. Half of the bands that are on it, I've never even heard. I think they were all one-hit wonders. I'm going, who were they? I've never even heard the song. And I used to watch some of the Pops in them days. That's when I must have finished it. It's like Quest of the Sport. I don't watch that no more neither.
I don't watch Coronation Street.
Do you?
No.
Neither do I.
Anyway.
I love it.
Derek, we've gone over. Anyway, Derek, so talk about that. Can you remember what to talk about? I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, look at some of the groups, classic groups in the sort of early middle part of the 1960s, the Mersey Beat.
Brilliant.
Groups. So people like Rory Storm, the Undertakers, Fallon's Flamingos.
Yeah. Fallon's Flamingos, yeah. Oh, brilliant. Oh, thanks a lot, Derek.
Oh, it'd be great.
And I just hope Jason's back, because he had to shoot out a moment, and he's got to put a clip up, an old DVD of mine. So everyone's saying you were brilliant.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant.
Thanks.
And he's going to get the book, says Brian Edley. I'm going to get that, he says. I'm going to get that. So
you can get it from my website. You can get a signed copy if you buy directly from the website with PayPal. I can do you a signed copy.
Yeah.
Do you know what, Derek? What we'll do the next time you're on, we'll talk about it at the beginning.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
No,
because people that want signed copies. Is that okay?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Excellent.
And the size of it, even if you don't read it, you can put it under the bedpost to stop your bed from falling over, couldn't you?
Absolutely. It's also in Liverpool Library, actually. They've got a copy. So if anybody wanted to check it out, it's in Liverpool Library.
Let's have a look at that myself. In the Central Library.
My books used to be in the Central, DVDs used to be in the Central Library, you know?
Did they?
Yeah, I don't know whether they're still there. I don't know whether that says 1 a.m. or I am. Oh, he's back home, yeah. So listen, Derek, thank you so much, and I can't wait for the next instalment. And now they can get people the way they've said it.
I enjoyed that.
Thank you, Derek.
Well, cheers, Frank. Cheers, Gerard.
Cheers, Derek.
Cheers,
nice to see you again.
Thank you.
Cheers.
That was good, that, wasn't it?
Yeah, he's good. He's good, isn't he?
Yeah. Knows what he's talking about, doesn't he?
Yeah. All the time. You ask him a question and he answers it.
Yeah. And you know what? He's not like us. We couldn't even remember Rory McIlroy. He's on the telly.
Exactly.
Derek's name on fellas from 1963 and everything.
It's not only that, when you said about, he's in advertisements and everything, isn't he? It was, not saying Derek, but, Rory McIlroy.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember him,
I couldn't. Short term memory, love.
Oh, yeah, look, Chris Smith. Learn more about the Beatles in 45 minutes listening to Derek. Than all the books I've read over the years. Isn't that brilliant?
Yeah. I'm going to have to watch that documentary now. Is it on for 8 hours, though?
No, I watched it in about, I forget it was.
The short
3 segments.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, it must be the 8 hours then, yeah. I tried to stream it the other day and it just wouldn't load, just wouldn't come on.
Wouldn't it?
No. I remember that George Harrison documentary he'd done, and I thought that was fantastic, that. He's done from his home down south, the big house.
Yeah.
He was walking down the garden and all that.
Yeah.
And I thought it was brilliant, that.